I still remember the sound, that sharp crack echoing through the morning air, when my water line snapped in two. It wasn't an accident, not even close. It was the sound of a grudge finally surfacing, of petty power games played by people who thought they ran the world because they chaired a homeowners association. They thought they could teach me a lesson. But they didn't know the most important fact about me. I own the land that Precious neighborhood drinks from. It started 3 months before the incident, when I moved into the old farmhouse on the hill above the Birchwood Estate subdivision, a glimmering maze of identical homes, trimmed hedges, and step-forward smiles. I'd inherited the property from my uncle, a quiet man who'd spent decades maintaining a small private well system that fed into the neighborhood's underground lines. Most of the residents didn't even realize it. They paid their HOA fees each month, assuming the water was city-managed. But Birchwood wasn't technically within city limits. The homeowners had struck a deal 30 years ago, a private water agreement with my uncle's company, Cedar Springs Utility. The HOA paid him a modest fee, and he supplied clean water from the aquifer beneath our land. When I moved in, I found the dusty file cabinets filled with old contracts, maps of buried lines, and a thick binder labeled Birchwood Agreement, 1994. That binder would soon become my weapon. At first, I didn't think much of the HOA. They sent a welcome to the community letter, complete with a printed list of rules, though I wasn't even technically part of the subdivision. Please maintain your property's appearance, as it reflects on Birchwood's image, it said. Grass must be under 6 inches. No farm animals. No unapproved fencing. I chuckled and tossed it aside. My farmhouse stood half a mile beyond their border. My land wasn't subject to their rules, and I made sure they knew it. But they didn't take that well. It started small, condescending emails from the HOA president, a woman named Linda Carlisle, a retired real estate agent who wore pastel cardigans and a permanent smile that never reached her eyes. Hello, Mr. Rowe, she'd write. Several residents have mentioned your property's unkempt appearance. Birchwood prides itself on uniform aesthetics and would appreciate it if you trimmed your hedges and removed the old tractor from view. I'd reply politely, Linda, my land isn't part of Birchwood. You have no jurisdiction here. Her response came an hour later. We'll see about that. Weeks passed, and the tension simmered. I caught HOA volunteers walking along my fence line, pointing, taking pictures. One evening I found a notice of violation taped to my gate, listing alleged infractions, overgrown grass, improper lighting, and non-conforming structure. I laughed out loud. Non-conforming structure? My barn was older than their entire neighborhood. So I called Linda. Linda, I said, remove your notice. I'm not part of Birchwood, and you're trespassing. Her tone was sugary sweet. Oh, Ethan, we're just trying to keep the community beautiful. Surely you understand how your property affects home values. If you cooperate, we'll make this easy for you. That was the first time I realized she wasn't asking. She was threatening, and that was the moment I decided to stop playing nice. The next week, I put up a new fence. 8 feet tall, cedar planked, solid as a wall. No gaps, no view. It wrapped around my property like a fortress. I added a sign, private property, not part of Birchwood Estates. Within 24 hours, Linda showed up at my gate in her beige SUV. She honked until I came out. This is unacceptable, she barked. That fence violates HOA Code 14C. Maximum height is 6 feet. It's not your code, Linda, I said, smiling, and you're trespassing. Her nostrils flared. We'll see about that. Same words, same smug tone. That was when I started keeping records, every letter, every voicemail, every veiled threat. I had a feeling I'd need them. A few days later, I woke up to find my water pressure gone. Completely dry taps. No flow, no sound, nothing. I went outside and followed the buried line that fed my farmhouse, a small PVC pipe that split from the main Birchwood connection near the fence. When I reached the point where it crossed into my property, I saw the damage. The pipe had been cleanly severed, crushed inward by something heavy, then taped over with a strip of duct tape, a pathetic attempt to hide the sabotage. I crouched down and felt the cut edges. They were fresh. Someone had done this last night. And when I spotted the small, shiny object lying in the grass nearby, a gold HOA volunteer badge. I knew exactly who. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, I called the number listed on the HOA's maintenance invoices, the same one they used to report water issues. It rang to a cheerful answering service. Birchwood Utilities, how can I help you? Yes, I said, disguising my irritation. This is Ethan Rowe. I believe there's been a problem with one of the supply lines. The operator paused. Oh, Mr. Rowe, the HOA president told us you've been disconnected. Non-compliance with community standards, I believe. Disconnected. The word hit like a hammer. They'd actually authorized it. They'd cut off my water from my system as punishment. I thanked the operator, hung up, and walked back up the hill. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something colder. It wasn't just vandalism. It was arrogance. They thought they controlled me, but they had no idea what I controlled. I spent that evening combing through the 1994 Birchwood Agreement. Every clause, every amendment, every signature. My uncle had written it carefully, and I could see his dry humor between the lines. The water rights were clear. Birchwood paid a fixed monthly fee to access the spring system, with automatic renewals every 5 years unless either party opted out. There it was, Section 12B. The supplier retained full ownership of the water source, equipment, and distribution system. Access may be suspended in the event of interference, misuse, or non-payment. Interference. Perfect. The next morning, I drove into town and filed a service notice with the County Utilities Department. Effective immediately, Cedar Springs Utility, that's me now, would be temporarily suspending service to Birchwood Estates pending investigation of an authorized tampering. Then I walked to the shed behind the farmhouse, opened the control box, and flipped the master valve shut. Within 20 minutes, the entire neighborhood went dry. It didn't take long for panic to spread. I stood at the edge of my property, watching from behind the fence as residents wandered their lawns with confused expressions, holding empty garden hoses. Sprinklers sputtered. Car washes stopped mid-cycle. Someone shouted from across the street, "Is anyone else out of water?" Linda's SUV tore up the cul-de-sac like a storm. She leapt out, phone in hand, hair frizzing under the sun. "Ethan!" she yelled through the fence. "What did you do?" I leaned on the rail. "I followed the contract, Linda. Section 12B. You interfered with my property, so I suspended service." She sputtered. "You can't do that. You're endangering families." I tilted my head. "Funny. That's how I felt yesterday when I had no water. You remember that, right? When your volunteers trespassed and cut my line." Her face turned red. "This is extortion. You'll be sued for everything you have." "Maybe," I said, "but I've got signed evidence, security footage, and the original contract. You might want to check who actually owns your tap before threatening me again." I walked away, leaving her shouting behind the fence. That night, I sat on the porch and watched Birchwood's perfect lawns wilt in the dusk. Gardeners packed up early. Sprinklers sat dry and useless. The HOA had met its match, and for the first time, the Queen of Control wasn't in control anymore. Still, as satisfying as it felt, I knew this wasn't over. People like Linda didn't surrender. They schemed. They plotted. And as I stared at the dark cluster of houses below, a thought crept in. How far would she go to get revenge? Would she fight me in court? Try to sabotage me again? Or would she finally realize what happens when you teach a lesson to the wrong man? I didn't know yet. But one thing was certain. The real lesson had only just begun. By morning, Birchwood Estates was in chaos. The group chat screenshots circulating among residents were priceless. Panic messages about water outages, emergency HOA meetings, and possible sabotage. Someone even suggested aliens. But I wasn't laughing. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control, the kind that corrupt people like Linda Carlisle thrived on. And I knew she'd never let this end quietly. So I prepared. The first sign came that afternoon, a white pickup truck rolling up my driveway, its sides emblazoned with Birchwood HOA maintenance. 2 men climbed out, both wearing safety vests, clipboards in hand. I met them halfway down the gravel path. "Morning, gentlemen," I said evenly. "Something I can help you with?" "Mr. Rowe," one asked, "we're here to inspect the pump system. The HOA president authorized us to restore water to the community." I smirked. "That's cute. You've got authorization from the HOA, but not from the owner. You're trespassing." One of them frowned. "We just need access to the valve." "Then you'll need a warrant," I said, holding up my phone. "Or I can call the sheriff right now and let him explain property law to you." They exchanged a look, irritation mixed with unease, before climbing back into their truck. As they drove off, I caught sight of Linda's Bay's SUV parked a few houses down, her silhouette visible through the windshield, watching. She didn't wave. Neither did I. By the next day, the story had spread beyond Birchwood. Local news vans lined the street below, microphones flashing as reporters interviewed furious homeowners. An entire neighborhood without water. How could this happen? They didn't know the truth. Not yet. The HOA fed them a clean little lie. Our supply unlawfully shut off service without warning. Unlawfully? That was bold. I waited 2 days, long enough for tempers to boil, before calling the news station myself. "You want the other side?" I told the reporter. "Come up the hill." They did. When the cameras rolled, I stood beside the old Cedar Springs pump house, holding up the binder my uncle had left me, the Birchwood Agreement. 30 years ago, my uncle provided this community with private water access. I explained calmly. They violated that contract by damaging the infrastructure on my land. So I suspended service, exactly as the agreement allows. The reporter's eyes widened. "So you're saying the HOA caused this outage?" I nodded. "They cut my line first." That night, the news segment aired across the county. By morning, half the town knew the truth. The other half had already decided whose side they were on. I thought that might end it. I was wrong. The following week, I received a letter, not an email, but a formal, embossed document hand-delivered to my porch. From the Board of Birchwood Estates Homeowners Association. Subject, notice of legal action. They were suing me for malicious deprivation of essential utilities and emotional distress. They even demanded $250,000 in damages. I laughed out loud. I spent the next 3 days compiling every piece of evidence, photos of the cut pipe, security footage of the HOA volunteers near my fence, recordings of Linda's voicemail threats, copies of the original contract. Then I made my own move. I hired a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but Michael Klein, a bulldog who'd made a career out of dismantling homeowner associations. His first word when he saw the file were, "This'll be fun." We filed a countersuit for property damage, breach of contract, and defamation. And just like that, Birchwood's Little Water feud became a full-blown war. The court date was set for late summer. In the meantime, I reopened the water supply, partially. Not to all of Birchwood, though, just to the handful of families who'd reached out to me privately with apologies and offers to pay directly. The rest remained dry. That split the neighborhood in two, the grateful and the bitter. Some residents turned on the HOA, demanding resignations. Others doubled down, insisting I was a vindictive recluse holding their water hostage. Linda's grip on power was slipping. I could feel it, but she wasn't done yet. One evening, around dusk, I heard movement by the fence, the crunch of boots, a metallic clink. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. There they were, 2 silhouettes crouched near the control box, tools glinting in the beam of my light. "Hey!" I barked. They froze, then bolted for the trees. I sprinted after them, adrenaline surging. One of them tripped over a root, dropping something metallic. When I reached the spot, they were gone, but the object lay in the dirt. A pair of bolt cutters. And tied around the handle was a laminated tag, property of Birchwood HOA Maintenance. That was all I needed. I called the sheriff that night, handed over the footage from my security cameras, and filed an official report for vandalism and attempted theft of utilities. The next morning, squad cars rolled into Birchwood. I watched from the hill as deputies knocked on doors. By noon, 2 HOA volunteers had been arrested. Linda, of course, claimed ignorance. They acted independently, she told the reporters. The HOA had nothing to do with it. But everyone knew she'd sent them. And the final straw came 2 days later, a quiet visit from one of Birchwood's oldest residents, a kind widow named Mrs. Potter. She stood at my gate, clutching a jar of homemade jam. "I just wanted to thank you," she said softly. "We heard about what they did. You didn't deserve that." Her eyes watered as she added, "They're scared, Ethan. They don't know what happens next." I smiled gently. "They're about to learn." The trial was brutal, but satisfying. Linda strutted into the courtroom like she still ran the show, draped in pearls and indignation. Her lawyer argued that I'd acted with malicious intent by cutting off the community's water supply. Then my attorney stood up. "Your Honor," Klein said, "would like to submit Exhibit A." He handed over the Birchwood agreement. The judge flipped through it, pausing at Section 12B. "It clearly states a supplier may suspend service in case of interference," he read aloud. "Did the HOA damage the supplier's infrastructure?" Klein pressed a button, and the video footage played on the monitor. 2 HOA volunteers snapping the PVC line, laughing as they taped it over. The courtroom fell silent. Linda's face drained of color. Within 30 minutes, the judge ruled in my favor. Birchwood's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, and the HOA was ordered to pay damages for property destruction, legal fees, and breach of contract, totaling nearly $380,000. Linda's composure cracked. As the judge read the verdict, she slammed her purse onto the table and hissed, "You'll regret this, Roe." I leaned closer and whispered, "I already don't." In the weeks that followed, Birchwood collapsed from the inside. Half the residents voted to dissolve the HOA altogether. The rest quit in protest. Linda resigned, citing health reasons, though everyone knew it was humiliation. The county absorbed the neighborhood shortly after, installing proper city water lines. The contract with Cedar Springs was officially terminated, but not before they paid every cent they owed. I used part of a settlement to restore my uncle's pump house, adding a small plaque beside the door. Cedar Springs, where the lesson was learned. It's been 6 months now. The grass is green again, the fence still stands, and peace has finally returned to the hill. Sometimes I sit on the porch and watch the lights flicker in Birchwood below. It looks peaceful from up here, too peaceful. Maybe. I think about what started it all, a broken pipe, a bruised ego, a petty woman who couldn't stand losing control. Funny how something as simple as water could wash away so much pride. A few weeks ago, I got a letter, not from the HOA, they're gone, but from Mrs. Porter. It read, "Dear Ethan, I wanted you to know, most of us down here think you did the right thing. Sometimes people like Linda forget that power isn't ownership, it's borrowed, and eventually the bill comes due. Thank you for reminding us where our water and our humility really come from." I folded the letter and smiled, because she was right. In the end, revenge hadn't been about vengeance at all. It was about balance, about showing that the ones who think they control everything often forget who's really keeping them afloat. And sometimes, the best way to teach them is to let them feel what it's like to run dry.